Welcome to Athletes, Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform to help athletes and other alumni network and connect with each other and tap into other resources in the space of finance and education and health. But more importantly, this podcast, it's all about athletes transitioning out of sport, which is a major issue today. And we interview former college and professional athletes, and we talk about their transition out of sports, ultimately into successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. And the whole idea is to teach and inspire athletes that there is, in fact, life after sports. So excited today to have Ryan Lavarnway. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing great. So Ryan is a former Major League Baseball player. He started out, he played college ball at Yale. And we talked a little bit that offline. And we'll ask him that question again, the famous alumni from Yale, aside from him. And then he played Major League Baseball. And then ultimately, as he transitioned out, he got into public speaking and also coaching. So Ryan, let's talk about when you were growing up playing sports, how did that shape you leading up into college?
I feel like sports shaped everything about me. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning. It gave me all my friends. It taught me how to win, how to lose, how to share, how to play for something bigger than myself and share a team goal. Kept me away from doing the wrong things. I feel like sports is everything in my life.
Yeah, I mean, you put that very well. Sometimes people start going these different tangents. That was great. When you got to college, okay, so the big thing we're talking about transition out of sports, was there education, like either starting out or throughout school, that kind of said, okay, Ryan, once you're done with sport, and to the other athletes as well, what's next in life? Did they have anything like that?
There may have been, and if there was, I wasn't aware of it because
Okay.
realistically, there's only been 3 Yale baseball players make it to the major leagues in the modern era. And there's been a few more drafted into pro ball that played a year, maybe 2, and then transitioned. So at Yale in particular, baseball players know they're not making a career playing baseball. But I never knew that. I went into Yale thinking I want to play pro baseball. And then as a sophomore, it became pretty clear that that was going to be a realistic path.
Okay. And that's something I think it's changed a little bit today. And I think when you're so driven in your sport, it's tough too. I mean, you talk about a lot of these football players, especially the ones that have aspirations to make it to the league. They're not really worrying about that. And I guess with some of these other sports like baseball, running was the same way. I mean, soccer, swimming, basketball, when there might not be as many people making it, let's say, depending on the school, you're thinking about that plan B, like when you're in school and you're looking at that big picture. But we're trying to work with schools and come up with ways to provide additional education, not only for the current athletes, but, athletes like yourself that once you're, transition out of sport, hey, what do I do now? And I think that's something we're really trying to work with and help people out with. So another area that's really important is networking, connecting. And so let's talk about the importance of doing that while you're still playing. So as a Major League Baseball player, talk about the importance, and then even going back to, prior to that, like to college, maybe even high school.
I never saw the benefit of it when I was still playing. I kind of describe myself as the family dog that will bark at whoever knocks on the door. If I don't know who they are, I was always a little bit rough around the edges. But then the people that were in the house, the people that are in our family, in our group, love them more than anything, right? And now that I've gotten out of the game, I see the power of networking much more. And even while I was waiting for you to hop on this call here, I was connecting with people on LinkedIn. It's all about networking. Who do you know?
Yeah, that's great. So I think we talk about sometimes too. You could go almost back to like high school and think about your friends in high school, your teammates, and their parents. I think a lot of people just don't know how to do it, or they might have a trepidation to do it, like you mentioned. I remember I was talking to a couple college athletes. Current one was a football player, one a baseball player, freshman, and they're like, "Rob, man, I would have loved to." I mean, they're still young, but even like they said, like to learn in high school that skill set. 'Cause I think it's so important to do that, and I think while you're playing, you're more relevant. So, I mean, would you see that too? I mean, obviously, in being a Major League Baseball player, I'm sure you've got a little more access to maybe some people like, hey, I want to meet Ryan. He's a Major League Baseball player. I mean, do you see that? Maybe not necessarily that you saw that with yourself, but maybe with others around you.
I definitely was more relevant, as you said, while I was still playing, especially in the cities that I played in. And I played all over. I have 30,000 Twitter followers, and I don't post on Twitter, right? It's just because I was in the big leagues at the time. And if you're currently active and you are relevant, you have an amazing opportunity to build a network, both online and in real life. And I think I have the benefit now of still having that on my resume, but it's definitely harder now that I'm not a current player.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean that's great advice just for these athletes out there. You know what Ryan's saying. I mean I've talked to agents too, and they say that players don't do it, and then all of a sudden they're done, and they're like, okay, well, where's my six-figure sales job, whatever, and like, well, not necessarily there because they didn't build those relationships in doing that networking, connecting.
It's hard because you want to focus on priority number one is, as a current athlete, especially in one of the four major sports, you have the opportunity to make life-changing generational wealth if you do your sport as well as possible. So you really want to focus. And that was my mindset was, I'm not networking. I'm not worried about plan B. I'm not worried about the transition because right now I'm worrying about the number one thing that matters the most. So I understand where athletes want to focus on the one thing they're doing. But for the vast, vast majority of us that still need to have a job after the career, because whether you made a couple million or a couple 100,000 or 10,000 playing sports, if you didn't make enough money to never work again, you're going to have another career. So the networking will be a benefit, and the thinking about transition before it's time to transition will help.
Great. Yeah, good to know on that. What about I guess baseball, your off season is probably a little bit shorter, but what are some of the things that some of the baseball players do, and how could, again, back to what we were just talking about, maybe prepare for that in the off season?
A lot of baseball players, me included, would give baseball lessons to kids. It's an easy $100 for the hour. It's easy time for money. Some people go work at Home Depot or work for their local insurance agency or something. They're not necessarily building a second career on the side. And again, if they're focused on the one career, there's maybe not time for that other career on the side. But I think it's a little short-sighted. And even looking back at what I did, it was a little short-sighted to focus on doing something for a little bit of money now when I could have been building something for later.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember talking to one guy, he's a former NFL player, and what he did is he got into he was a quarterback, and he got into a couple of the receivers and one of the defensive guys, cornerbacks. They got into real estate, and so all of a sudden he had these teammates around him that were kind of teaching him about the real estate, and it's something that ultimately, when he got out and when he retired, it was he got into that. So I think something definitely to prepare for. So let's kind of switch gears. This obviously it's important to us with Alumni Direct and talking about alumni connections. So when you were at Yale, were there athletes coming back across all sports, not just baseball, but kind of not just for the golf tournaments, but to maybe work with some of the mentoring, some of the athletes? Did any of that exist when you were there?
There was one in particular that did come back, Craig Breslow, and he was in the major leagues at the time, and he really took me under his wing to the point where we actually ended up being teammates in the big leagues, and we actually played internationally for Israel together also. So Craig was a great resource for me, and we're still good friends to this day. But there wasn't a lot of ex-players in professional roles that came back to speak to us about other opportunities in transition, like you're saying.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's something that schools need to encourage. And I start getting into this conversation a lot on the podcast here, but I think it's a two-way street. But I think alumni want to come back, and I think there's a need for these alumni athletes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specific to their sport. I mean, you could be a former Yale baseball player coming back talking to the football team or the soccer team, basketball, whatever it might be, but just kind of mentoring and helping, because I think in general alumni want to help. So even if they weren't athletes, I mean, I think people want to come back and say, okay, well, I'm an entrepreneur now, and I'm going to talk to these athletes and talk about like what they could do next. So that's something that I think is important to tap into. And I mean, do you think like, is that something like, you personally would see involvement in, like, let's all of a sudden if Yale called you up and it wasn't just about, hey, Ryan, can you give us money? Ryan, could you come back and work with it? Would that be of interest to you as a former player?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's a little bit out of the way from Denver to Connecticut. But when I'm in that neck of the woods, I would love to go speak to the players or otherwise.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. So this is always I like to ask the fun question, and you know, if you've got a chance to listen or watch any other podcasts that I've done. But what advice, 10 words or less, would you give to freshman Ryan in college?
Don't eat so much.
Then
The
you might
dining
not be.
hall food was great. No, but I needed to put on some weight at that time anyway. No, what I would say is do exactly what you're doing. I had fun in college. I worked my butt off in college, both academically, socially, and on the baseball field. I accomplished all of my goals. Maybe if I had to give a little bit of advice, I'd say get better grades. But my GPA hasn't affected my career in any way at this point. So
I'm sure it would. It's interesting. I wonder if that mentality is different. Well, I mean, obviously every person is different, but like school wise, because like at Yale, I mean, you know, being an Ivy League school, I mean, that, you know, it'd be more, you know, it just seems like you hit the ground running, education and everything else. I mean, do you think it would play differently for somebody else at a different school?
I don't know. Again, my education for me was always a great backup plan and something that I could fall on when and if baseball didn't work out. But baseball worked out for 16 years, and now I've parlayed that into my next career, and which has been really wonderful to the point where I have one semester of college left, and I don't know that it will move the needle for me to go back and finish and get that degree on my wall. But it's been more about transitioning for me out of sport has been more about trying new things and seeing how you fit in those new things. Whereas a year ago, as I was trying to transition and I was dealing with some depression and some self identity issues, I was trying to make pros and cons list and decide what I wanted to do next. And there was no movement and no progress for me until I actually stepped into things and tried them and was able to see what it felt like and how I saw the world reflect back at me.
Gotcha. All right, so let's talk about the well, actually one more question because I did ask you the freshman one. Let's throw the senior one. Any difference there? Any words of advice to senior Ryan?
I never was a senior.
Ah, that's right. Oh
But
man, look at that. He got me on that one. Okay, let's talk about your transition out of college, you know, into professional baseball. Was there, you know, a lot of changes there?
there was, even though in college I was across the country from my family and in a way I was on my own. There's still the setup of the gym is in one place, your dorm room is in one place, the cafeteria, it's all built in for you. The laundry is in the dorm versus you go into pro ball and now you're in an apartment that you have to find on your own and pay for on your own. And you have to do your own laundry and go grocery shopping and make your own food. And it's really college. You grow up a lot because you're away from your family, but then going off into the world, you grow up a lot really fast again because you have to learn how to be more self-sustaining. And I know there are probably people that live in apartments during their college career, but I was in the dorms my whole 3 years. And with people that was a high school or a college baseball team that was built in peers all going through the same thing. You get to pro ball, there's people from other countries, people that don't speak your language, people that grew up very differently than you, cultural differences, language differences. So there was a lot of learning how to be an adult with a lot of different people all at once while trying to also play my best.
Okay, that's it. That's interesting. And then one thing I thought about going back is what kind of interaction did you have with other athletes across, you know, and this is I guess both while you're in college and professionally, because I think we talked about this offline, but it just seems like the typical the sports seem to stick together. I mean, is there interaction amongst other, I guess maybe especially like maybe at the major league level, like other sports, like you're interacting with the NFL guys and the hockey guys, you know, basketball players?
In my experience, there wasn't a ton. I mean, Tom Brady sent us all Uggs when we won the World Series, and he was with the Patriots, and we were with the Red Sox. That was really nice. But I was never the most famous player on any of the big league teams I played on. I think I've seen interactions between the real famous guys that go to each other's games, sit courtside or sit in the front row and really interact. That wasn't my experience. But I have found as a former player, ex big leaguer, when I reach out to other ex NFL players or ex basketball players, there is a camaraderie there now.
That's interesting. And then so what do you attribute that to?
I think there's a shared experience, right? Like we represented our sport at the highest level. We lived our dream. People always are trying to offer to invest our money or offer to give us, there's things that come with being an ex-professional athlete that I feel like only ex-professional athletes understand. And there's a common bond there.
And interesting. I mean, and do you think it goes down to like a lower level, not lower, but the fact of like just maybe from a college perspective, like do you see that in, college athletes kind of having that same mentality?
Probably, especially now that they have the NIL and, people are making some real money in college and taking advantage of all these new opportunities that the rule changes have allowed. I think that's going to go have the same type of effect.
Yeah, so you teed me up good on that one. So I don't talk about this on every episode, but what's your thoughts on an NIL, positive, negative? I mean, because you're obviously you played before in college, but way before NIL, but always interested to get some perspective there.
Well, I'm all for players getting compensated, right? If you're not paying the players, then either the ownership or the big bad empire / university is just pocketing it. So I'm all for the players getting paid. I think they need to figure out something with the transfer portal where you can, maybe you can transfer once, but these people that transfer every single year to move up, it's hard to build camaraderie, teamwork. It's hard for coaches, I imagine, to build a program or try to discipline anyone when they can just leave if they don't like it. And I feel like it would potentially breed prima donnas or breed entitlement, but I support the players getting paid.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely see that, and that's a big thing. I think probably the biggest negative to it that people bring up is just from maybe like a lack of education, especially because now it goes all the way down to the high school level in like 38 states. So when you got at the high school level and then college, these athletes not knowing that, hey, guess what? You're going to have to pay taxes, and maybe you need to set up an LLC and these different things that they don't know about. And I think as it's probably things that at some point I think schools are trying to do more of it, and I think they're going to probably be mandated to do more of it, just to help those athletes out because it is a big difference there with NIL. So let's talk now about your transition from when you were done, you retired from Major League Baseball. I mean, here you played since you were 5 years old, probably maybe younger, and your whole life, and now all of a sudden it's kind of gone in a sense. How did that go for you? And talk a little bit about that.
There was, I think I mentioned it a few minutes ago, there was self-identity issues. There was some borderline depression issues, a lot of thinking about what I could possibly do, making pros cons lists in my head or on paper. I tried selling mortgages. I think the best thing I did was I met with all the men in my area that had at one point said, hey, whenever you're done, call me, I'll hire you. Because lots of people had said that. And I got recruited to do medical sales, medical device sales, insurance sales, mortgage sales, financial managing. I think those are the typical fields that people fall into after sports because of the competition and the eat what you kill nature of it. But in my experience, the thing that really ended up helping me transition was I had to try the things. I couldn't just sit back and say, well, what do you like about it? What's your best day? What's your worst day? What's a typical day? How did you get into it? How did you succeed? Asking all those questions was great and gave me some information, but it did nothing to tell me how I was going to feel as I did those things or how I was going to see myself in the world as I did that new thing.
So what advice would you give then to players as they're transitioning out of sport?
I think absolutely ask all those questions, but at a certain point, the only thing that's going to give you real feedback is to actually try doing it. And you can go into trying to do things for a month, 2 months, 6 months, especially if you're in your 20s or early 20s transitioning out of college or a couple of years as a pro. You have time to try things. You don't have to commit to what do I want to do for the rest of my life before you try it. Say, I'm going to do this because I think, based on all the questions I asked, I think this will be good for me for the next year. And you give it a year, give it everything you got for a year or 6 months, whatever it is. But then also give yourself permission where this didn't work like I thought it was. Let me try something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. What would you say that you miss most now that you're not playing anymore?
there's two things. There's the camaraderie of going through the same thing with the same goals as a group of guys. But I think even more than that, the certainty of knowing what a win is today. Right? Like we talked about this before we started recording of I'm trying to build a speaking business. So that involves branding myself, getting headshots, writing a bio, creating a speech description, making sure the speech is going to really resonate with people. But it's also marketing and sales, where if I have the greatest speech in the world, but nobody pays me to do it, nobody hears the speech. So I have to build my LinkedIn network and create content and network and say, who do you know that might want to hire me to speak? So there's so many things that I could be doing every day. And there's no certain recipe for success. There's no standard, well, you do these 7 things and we can guarantee that it's a win on a Wednesday. So for me, the biggest thing I miss is when I was playing baseball, when you wake up in the morning, we're either going to win today or we're going to lose today. I'm either going to get hits today or I'm going to strike out today. Now it's, I hope to accomplish these 14 things. I might get to 3 of them. I don't know which one's the most important.
Yeah, I think we all live that, especially like in the world of entrepreneurial. Of just having that long list, and what are you going to accomplish today? What do you get dragged into, like in a different area? Absolutely. So you basically you were done and you transitioned out, and now you got into public speaking. So talk a little bit about that, like maybe some of the topics that you cover.
I cover number 1, mindset. I was called up to the big leagues and sent back down, traded or released 26 times.
Wow.
And I was taken off of a major league roster more than anyone else in the history of baseball, which means that I was added back to a major league roster more than anyone else in the history of baseball. So as much as I would have wanted to be on the Boston Red Sox for 15 years and made $100 million, nobody can relate to that, right? But people can relate to, I hit a wall, I hit a roadblock, I hit adversity. How do I overcome this? How do I set my mindset up for success, even though the path is not clear? So I talk about the things that I learned in my career that helped me achieve success after failure, so that the people that I'm speaking to can take something away from it for their own lives.
Okay, and like typically, like what are the audience that you're talking to?
I did a speech the other night for a high school and their parents. Somebody in the audience is a SWAT commander. He wants me to speak to his squadron. I've spoken to insurance sales, tech sales, accounting firms, a paper company, really overcoming hardship, overcoming adversity, and setting up your mindset for success is universal. So anybody that wants to overcome hard things, I think could hopefully benefit from my message.
Oh, that's great. And well, it's interesting. We talked about, and you said you were a catcher. Is there something to that? It just seems like, that I mean, I guess in a sense, because you are kind of like the general in the field, right? I mean, it just seems like the catching mindset is kind of what you're portraying now too, that whole leadership and all that. Is that like, do you see that with other positions, or pretty much like it's like a big catcher thing?
I think it could have to do with the position. I think it could also have to do with the individual. There's plenty of shortstops, center fielders, pitchers, third basemen that are leaders on their team and on the field. If you take the onus of leadership, you take the onus of helping those around you and really helping pull the team together, you could play any position.
Okay. And so now you're doing the speaking, looking for different opportunities there. And you also mentioned you're doing coaching. Like what type of coaching are you doing? Are you still doing the physical coaching too with kids, or just more coaching, like just again back to like mentality and all that?
I do some coaching with the Chicago Cubs. I coach their catchers on a roving basis. And the leadership coaching that I do, I've partnered with a woman here in Colorado who for 25 years has been coaching executives on how to be better leaders. And she's created a wonderful program. She wrote a book. It's called Spark Brilliance. And I get the benefit of her 25 years of experience and research and data-backed proven strategies on how to coach people on leadership based on the example of how do people act, react, and interact on a daily basis.
Okay. What's you sparked another thought there. Talk a little bit about mentoring and like because you're kind of doing that in a sense now. Um, did you have influential people along the way, one in specific to like as like different teams, or was it kind of several people that kind of drove you through that?
I think there was coaches along the way that they said the thing I needed to hear at the right time, whether I wanted to hear it or not. And I've had some teammates and peers along the way also that have meant a lot to me.
Okay. What's your passion project right now? You got any passion projects?
I'm really passionate about speaking and empowering people. I want people to walk out of my keynotes and feel like they can run through a wall and actually do something about it. Right? I gave a speech 2 nights ago, and in the last 5 minutes, I challenged them by 10 a.m. to do something, to actually take action on what they were feeling, and to send me a message. And I got 3 messages the next morning, and that got me fired up. That something I said made somebody feel so motivated to actually make a change in their life.
That's awesome. I mean, I talk about it, even like with this podcast. I mean, hopefully I always say, like, even if we can reach one person, that's going to make a difference with just all the great advice that the athletes give. So you're kind of like that Rocky mentality. I like that. So, when you want to get fired up, you got to reach out to Ryan. So talk about how people can find you.
I'm easy to find. There's not a lot of Ryan Lavarnways out there. LinkedIn, I'm active. Instagram, I'm trying to get a little bit better at. My website is always an option, ryanlavarnway.com, and I answer all my own messages. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from some of your listeners, Rob.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I mean, that's I say it just I call them the nuggets, but each episode there's just always something I think somebody can take out of it. Just there's a lot of great stuff, and I think it's it's sad because there's a lot of issues with athletes transition out of sports, and it sounds like yours has been there were some trials in the beginning like anybody, but you made through and are doing well. And I think that's what we want to hopefully achieve with a lot of athletes. You hear some of these sad stories and want to eliminate those sad stories that are out there. So, well, you can find us on alumnidirect.com. If you go to our YouTube channels where you can watch the podcast, we're also across all the different podcast networks. Everybody need to, follow us, just listen to these episodes and some of the great advice that, folks like Ryan have given. So Ryan, thanks again so much. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Rob.
You're welcome.